the hood. You know, either I'm getting shorter or trucks are getting taller. It just seems like every truck I get in here, I'm barely looking at the engine. Pressure tested the cooling system on this, right? And we were losing pressure. No external leaks. And so we're gonna take out this temp sensor in our EGR pipe. This is something we do because now we want to take a look at this thing way over here, and this is the only way to access that. I guess you could undo the pipe, but this is the easiest way to access that with a good bore scope. And let's just crawl over there and have a look at that dang thing. I'm looking for antifreeze coming off the coils of that. There's the corrugation. So point to that. Where's that corrugation?
It's right
here.
here.
That tube over here. That tube. So now we're in that part of it, and here comes the cooler. Okay, wait a minute. What's all that red stuff? Is our antifreeze red in this thing?
Yeah.
Well, there it is. Right here is the wetness on this. There's the cooler, but you see this wetness down here? The bottom? I know it's the top of my screen, but everything's 180 on, you remember, on a mirror or a camera. But right there, that's antifreeze. So that's how condition, cause, correction, confirm. We've confirmed that we have an EGR cooler leaking. So the process here, boy, it's nice to have a bore scope that's got an articulated end that you can move and see whatever you want. So the process here is we're gonna go ahead and replace the EGR cooler, and then we'll repressure test it and verify that we have no other leaks. Let's do that. So we're gonna do an upgrade on this. It's bulletproof, isn't it?
Yep.
Oh man, that's a hefty unit. Look at the core inside this. It's a lot larger. The holes where the gases go through, you can kind of see it down in here on this side. Let's put that bad boy on there, dude.
All right. Another thing that really helps too is this is an exhaust component, so usually the hardware gets really rusted out. So one thing we can do is spray it with some good penetrating oil. We really like this Kroll oil. It's really good. Hard to see, but way back there's two nuts that bolt this cooler down to the exhaust manifold. So if we spray those with penetrating oil now, by the time I get to them, they'll be a lot easier to pull off. So we got this EGR control valve all unbolted now, and it can just pull up and out of the way. We'll leave it hanging over here so it's out of our way so we can access the EGR cooler here. There's one bolt here that's right under the nipple for this crankcase filter, so you got to pull this crankcase filter off. So there's about 8 bolts around it, and it pulls right out and out of the way. Now it's much easier to get back to this bolt right here. This EGR cooler is just held on with 4 bolts here, and then there's 2 nuts in the back. Then you can wiggle it free, and then we're going to try and slide it back and then slide it up and out. And here's our cooler. Now it's going to leak some coolant. So right here is where you can see where we had the bore scope looking inside, and I've drained the coolant, but you can see this white crusty buildup. That's from the coolant getting hot inside this EGR cooler and essentially cooking inside of it. So You can see we got the EGR cooler here, but down here in the bottom, you can see where it's wet and even see a bit of an orange color to it. And that's the coolant that's been leaking into the cooler. So you can see right back here, this is where the EGR cooler gets the exhaust from. And there's two studs here that have nuts on them. You gotta get those nuts off. And then there's this gasket right here. You gotta make sure you replace this gasket anytime you take this cooler off. You do not want to have a leak there. And so the exhaust gases come out of here, go through the EGR cooler to help cool them down, and then they come in through here. And then this is a control valve that helps control the flow of the exhaust gases. And then it comes around the front of the motor through the EGR valve, and then down, back down into the intake manifold. Try to clean the toxins out of the exhaust, because you're essentially burning it twice. And this was the corrugation we were seeing in the bore scope too. And what happens when that coolant leaks is you get a lot of wet soot. And then to clean this up, I like to use a Scotch-Brite pad. This is red Scotch-Brite. You know, it's not too abrasive, but it works good to, you just want to take the rust off the top of the manifold here. So just a back and forth motion all around and clean up that rust buildup. Right here on this pipe, you can see some rust buildup that we have here. And what would happen if I don't clean that up is we put our O-ring in there, it could tear that O-ring and then we'll get a coolant leak. So I like to just get a wire brush on the end of a drill and then just take that off. You don't got to get super aggressive with it, but just kind of polish it is what you're thinking you want to do. That rust is gone. A little bit of pitting in there, but just put a little bit of assembly lube or a lube of some type in there, and then it'll all slide back together and you won't have any leaks going back together. We like to use these bulletproof diesel EGR coolers. They're a name that's been around a long time. They really build a great product. And this EGR cooler actually is a higher flow. If you see down in there, there's bigger holes that allow the exhaust gases to move through a lot easier. And then they're just built of a better quality material too. They're a lot less prone to leak. So that's why whenever we replace these, we go with these coolers. We've had really good luck with them and like their product. We'll remove this O-ring right here, place it with the new one. You can see this one's a little more square, where this one's a lot more rounded. Just over time they compress and wear, and then eventually coolant will be able to get past this O-ring and start leaking. So you always want to replace these O-rings when you have these off. This O-ring off as well. You can see that one's nice and square too, compared to our new one. Slip that on there. Assembly lube, a little bit of trans gel. Just coat the inside there so it slides on and doesn't catch this O-ring. And then just put a little assembly lube on there as well. And we got that in place. And then we'll just have to slip our gasket in here before we put our clamp back on. Don't forget this gasket. If you do, you'll have a leak here. To go ahead and clamp this down. 3 bolts that are different. 3 of them have studs. You want it to go here, and then the back too. Makes it harder to take them off, but they have retainers for the wiring harness that clip on these studs, so it's important you put them back in the right spot. Push it through, and these are the retainers I was talking about that slide on these studs. Put that guy back up here. All right, now we can I like to vacuum fill my cooling system. So we'll hook up our vacuum refiller here. The way this tool works is really nice. Hook my shop air here, and I shut off this side. You open it up and you can see it start to build a vacuum. What's that doing is it's sucking all of the air out of the cooling system. So that way we know we don't get air bubbles inside the cooling system. While that's filling up, I'll come over here and fill up my coolant bottles. And while that air is still running, I gotta purge the air out of this hose. So you just open the valve for a second and it sucks the coolant through. And now I can shut off the air and you can watch your gauge. And it should hold steady. If you have a leak somewhere, it'll start sucking the air out. And then this gauge will start to drop. So it's another cool tool to test for leaks too. You can see right here on this radiator hose, it's sucked flat. Right here it has a spring in it so it can't collapse all the way, but it's just sucked all that air out. You can see here that that needle is not moving at all. So we know we shouldn't have any leaks. So then you just open this valve right here, and then you can watch it sucks the coolant out of the bottle. Now we've got the truck back running again. It's good just to give it a good visual, you know, make sure we don't have any coolant leaking, any exhaust leaking, make sure all the wiring harnesses are in a good spot, and that it's ready to go for a test drive.
Dylan's got it all done. And of course, you always want to remember condition, cause, correction, confirm. Vacuum checking the system and making sure that it holds vacuum or pressure for 15 minutes when you're done is the best way to ensure I've got all the leaks taken care of. If you still have a leak, you start back for the condition, which is a leak, the cause, start looking again for it. Loose hose clamp, it could be a blown head gasket. You don't know that, but so you check for external leaks, you don't find anything, you got to go inside. Thanks.